A black executive walked into the boardroom for what should have been a routine strategy review, but in less than 5 minutes, a senior manager pointed at him and said, "You people love talking, don't you?" Laughter followed. Silence followed that. But what no one realized was who they had just insulted and what he controlled. Within hours, the company's leadership structure would begin to collapse, triggered not by outrage, but by cold precision. What happened next changed everything. Stay with me. This is a story you won't forget. Before we begin, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from, and if this story hits home, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the silence. It started like any other meeting, but nothing about what came next was ordinary. There are rooms in America where men like Ezra Cole are not expected to speak, only to serve. And though the signs have been removed and the water fountains now flow for all, the silence that greets a black man in a boardroom still hums with the quiet breath of power unexamined. It was a Tuesday, gray light outside, glass walls inside. The 14th floor conference suite of Bellwether and Row hummed with the kind of corporate energy that smells like espresso and fear. Executives filed in, ties tightened, slide decks queued. The quarterly strategy summit was moments from beginning. At the edge of the room stood Martin Vickers, head of global operations, self-styled king of numbers and noise. He wore arrogance like cologne, speaking in clipped jokes and smug directives. He was the kind of man who mistook volume for authority and confusion for loyalty. And on this day, he mistook something else, Ezra Cole, for help. Ezra entered quietly. No fanfare. Just a charcoal suit, well-worn shoes, and a leather folio tucked under his arm. He nodded to no one. He didn't have to. The room had already decided who he was. Vickers didn't look up. He pointed. "Hey, coffee, black, no sugar. That's what you people do best, right?" There it was. That old American disease, delivered with a chuckle, dressed in sarcasm, baptized in superiority. The room didn't gasp. It chuckled, lightly, nervously. Not because the joke was funny. Because no one wanted to be the one not laughing. Ezra did not flinch. He didn't lower his eyes. He simply said, "My name is Ezra Cole. I'm here for the executive review." The silence after that was not empty. It was loaded, full of reconsideration, shame, the sound of power recalibrating itself. Vickers scoffed. "Executive review? Are you sure you're not looking for facilities? You're on the wrong floor, friend." Ezra said nothing more. He walked past Vickers, placed his folio at the far end of the table, and sat. But what no one yet knew, not Vickers, not the assistants, not the men who laughed nor the women who looked away, was that Ezra wasn't here for a review. He was here to conduct it. There's a peculiar kind of war that happens in places where everything looks polite. The coffee is warm, the carpet soft, and the racism is dressed in a press suit. Ezra Cole knew this war well, not from books or protests, but from the way doors close a little faster when your skin walks in first. And Bellwether and Row, for all its glass walls and strategic talk, was no different. The second morning came with rain tapping lightly on the windows, as if the sky itself was pacing. Ezra arrived early, as always. There is dignity in readiness. His notes were ordered. His tie is straight. But still, the air around him felt like it had been cleared by a committee of doubt. The room slowly filled. Vickers entered last, 12 minutes late, as if he believed time bent for him. He avoided Ezra's eyes, but made sure to greet every other man in the room by name. "Morning, Rob." "What's up, Dan?" "Emma, are you surviving the circus?" Ezra sat unmoved. The agenda kicked off with a product realignment discussion. Ezra offered a measured proposal, one rooted in data and proven models. "If we adjust the cycle to accommodate adaptive sprints," he said, "we reduce burnout and increase throughput by 17% over 2 quarters. The room paused. Not because the idea lacked weight, but because they were waiting for someone else to translate it into a paler voice. Sure enough, 2 seats down, a junior white analyst, Seth, nodded and said, "Yeah, Kind of like what I was thinking last night, actually. If we just make the dev cycle tighter and push QA earlier. Heads nodded. Vickers smiled. Now we're cooking. Good thinking, Seth. Make a note of that. Ezra closed his folder softly. He didn't protest. He didn't remind them. He'd learned years ago that in rooms like this, genius wasn't measured in merit. It was measured in distance from them. And if your brilliance had to travel through a white mouth before it was heard, then it was never yours to begin with. The day went on. The tensions tightened. During lunch, Ezra sat alone, his salad untouched. A young black woman from HR, Jacinda, passed by, paused, then sat across from him. I saw what they did there, she said quietly. You spoke first. But they only heard you when Seth repeated it. Ezra nodded. That's how the game's played. Shouldn't have to be, she said. No, Ezra replied, eyes still fixed on the table, but it is. And I'm not here to win their game. I'm here to end it. Back upstairs, the next meeting began. This time, Ezra was given the floor for the Wilkins Report, a project tied directly to the upcoming merger. It was strategic, delicate, and the kind of assignment typically reserved for someone more tenured, as the unspoken code went. He walked them through the metrics, showed how the legacy systems were leaking productivity, how their senior managers were masking inefficiencies by burying costs into line items that nobody outside ops would think to question. He laid it out plain. No flair, no theatrics, just precision. And when he finished, Vickers leaned back, smirking. Impressive deck. Where'd you dig this up? Been going through someone's drawer in finance. Ezra looked him in the eye. From the same database your team's been avoiding since last year's audit. A few eyes widened. Emma Caldwell, the interim COO, shifted in her seat. She had seen enough meetings to know when one man was trying to bury another in the room he just built. But Ezra wasn't there to be buried. And still, the blows came. Subtle, sharp, intentional. An email thread about team promotions. Ezra's name left off. A calendar invite moved last minute, his schedule clashed, and no one cared. A Slack message from a peer. Hope you're not taking all this personally. It's just how we push each other here. Push. No. Ezra wasn't being pushed. He was being measured, tested by men who feared that their mirrors might break if a black man ever stood in front of them and refused to shrink. That evening, long after the others had left, Ezra remained. The windows reflected his silhouette against the city, a man alone but not uncertain. He opened his laptop, compiled the day's missteps, the erasures, the comments dressed as jokes. He labeled the file, Systemic Subtleties, Week 2. He didn't need vengeance. He needed a record. Because while the others wrote him out of memos and credit lines, Ezra was writing something else. A reckoning. There are wounds in this country that never bleed. They simply pulse, quietly, daily, beneath neckties and elevator greetings. Ezra Cole understood this. He knew that racism in a suit was harder to name, more dangerous to confront, and far easier to excuse. But he also knew that just because the fire no longer burned in public didn't mean the building wasn't still smoldering. By the third week, Ezra had become both fixture and phantom. He was there, every morning, every meeting, but still somehow treated as if he had arrived by accident. The staff didn't speak to him unless they had to. The junior analysts deferred to Seth even when the directive came from Ezra. And Vickers, Martin Vickers, had sharpened his tactic, sarcasm now sheathed in mentorship. On Tuesday, during a systems realignment session, Ezra introduced a scalable framework for internal collaboration, simple, efficient, based on case studies from firms twice their size. It was, by every metric, a sound strategy. Vickers leaned forward, smiling. Impressive, he said, drawing out the word like a yawn. Though I imagine this kind of structure works best in, let's say, smaller firms. More nimble environments. Everyone heard what he meant. Black-led firms. Diversity startups. places where leadership didn't look like him and therefore didn't matter. Ezra remained composed. He'd learned not to interrupt a man while he buried himself. Emma Caldwell, again, noticed. She always did. But notice was not intervention. It was the kind of passive discomfort women of color and power were often forced to carry, too senior to be silent, too calculated to be candid. That evening, Ezra received a friendly calendar invite titled Catch Up with Leadership, sent not from Emma, not from his direct contact in strategy, but from a mid-level manager in marketing named Bryce who, notably, had never spoken more than 5 words to Ezra before. The meeting took place in the 12th floor lounge, the one usually reserved for client-facing engagements and photo ops. Ezra entered and found Bryce already seated, nervously flipping through a tablet. "Hey, Ezra," he began, chipper but rehearsed. "Thanks for taking the time. Just wanted to connect on a few cultural cohesion initiatives." Ezra sat without smiling. "Go on." Bryce coughed lightly. "Some of the team has been wondering about your role. Like, structurally. We get that you're involved in oversight, but there's been some confusion around, alignment." Alignment. That was the word they used when they wanted to put you back in your place without admitting they ever moved you in the first place. Ezra leaned forward, voice even. "Bryce, what you're really asking is, who gave me the authority to sit at your table and speak like I belong there?" No, of course not," Bryce stammered. "Yes," Ezra continued. "That's exactly what you're asking. And the answer is, I don't need to prove my authority in a building I helped appraise from the foundation up." Bryce fell silent. The message had been sent. And Ezra had no intention of sending it again. Later that week, during the pre-brief for a major investor summit, Ezra's name was missing from the speaking order. The presentation contained multiple slides taken directly from his draft, repackaged with lighter fonts and Seth's initials in the footer. He didn't object. Not then. He let it slide, like a man cataloging thefts too small to prosecute but too large to ignore. He returned to his desk, opened his file, now labeled Week 3, Pattern Recognition, and typed. "They will co-opt your voice, erase your face, and then applaud their own reflection. And still they will ask you to be a team player." But it was that Friday that changed the game. Michael Reyes, one of the company's quietest VPs, a man of Cuban descent who rarely spoke unless the data was undeniable, approached Ezra outside the parking structure. He didn't smile. He didn't waste time. "I've seen it," he said simply. Ezra didn't ask what. "I was in the room when Vickers called you ambitious with that tone. I was there when your slides were handed to Seth like they were free samples." Ezra looked at him, tired but steady. "And?" Michael hesitated. "I've been here 10 years. I've never seen someone handle it the way you do." Ezra narrowed his gaze. "That's because most of us never make it this far. And when we do, we're told to keep our heads down or they'll find someone else who will." Michael nodded. "They're nervous." "They should be," Ezra replied. That weekend, Ezra sent one email. Not to HR. Not to Emma. But directly to Meredith Vale, the company's CEO, distant, powerful, and until now, silent. The subject line read, "Integrity is not a brand." The body of the message was brief. "If you want to know what's actually happening inside your culture, meet me. No cameras. No PR. Just the truth. Your legacy depends on how you answer this email." He signed it with nothing but his name. And then he waited, not out of fear, but out of certainty. Because Ezra knew, the weight of racism isn't always the blow. Sometimes, it's the waiting for someone to finally admit the house was crooked long before you walked in. There are 2 kinds of silence in this country, one that protects and one that condemns. Ezra Cole had lived beneath both. But now, as he stood in the crucible of Bellwether and Rowe, he realized the most dangerous silence wasn't what was said or unsaid. It was what was deliberately unheard. The Monday after he sent the email, the atmosphere in the building had shifted. Not loudly, but like the weather before a storm. The usual forced cheer in morning greetings was thinner. The jokes were more rehearsed. Martin Vickers passed Ezra in the hall and offered a nod, not out of respect, but strategy. Ezra nodded back, not out of courtesy, but clarity. He saw what they feared, not a man speaking out of turn, but a man who understood the system from the inside out. By noon, a reply had come. Not from the CEO herself, but from her office. A meeting had been scheduled, off-site, discreet, private. 7:30 a.m. Wednesday. A neutral conference room in a third-party office space. Ezra showed up 10 minutes early. He always did. When Meredith Vale entered, she brought with her the cold stillness of someone who was not used to being questioned. Mid-60s, immaculately tailored, a face carved in corporate diplomacy. She sat without shaking his hand. She opened with no small talk. "Mr. Cole," she said, folding her hands, "you've requested my time." "That is not a small thing in my position." Ezra stared back. "Neither is silence in yours." She blinked, just once. He had struck the edge of her armor. "I've received your audit trail," she continued. "I've seen the documentation, the patterns. They're troubling." "Not troubling enough to stop," Ezra said. Meredith raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? I've been in your building for 4 weeks, and the systems you say you're surprised by have been running unchecked for 4 years. What surprises you now is not the disease, it's that someone finally gave it a name." She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a thin file and pushed it across the table. "Bradley Vickers," she said. "We've had previous complaints, but nothing that stuck. Nothing formal." Ezra didn't reach for the file. Because systems don't protect the wounded. They protect the ones holding the knife. She paused. This time, longer. "And what do you want?" she asked finally. Ezra smiled, just slightly. "Truth. Not in a press release. In policy. I want review authority. I want hiring audits. I want protection for the voices you've trained to stay quiet. And I want a forum where the people who've been silenced can finally speak, without retaliation." "That's not a small ask." Ezra leaned in. "Neither is dignity." Meredith looked down at her hands. She didn't agree. But she didn't walk out. Which, for a woman in her position, was admission enough. Back at Bellwether, the storm was already forming. Whispers had grown teeth. Ezra's name began showing up in email threads not as a collaborator, but as a problem. Vickers, sensing a tide shifting, started quietly organizing resistance. He called it preserving company culture. Translation: preserving control. On Thursday, an anonymous message was posted to the company's internal forum. It was brief. It didn't name names. But it said enough. When you let one man bend the rules to make a point, everyone else drowns in the fallout. We built this place. Don't let it be hijacked for some diversity stunt. It didn't say Ezra's name. It didn't have to. Jacinda from HR called him that afternoon. Her voice is low. Nervous. "Ezra, they're watching you." "I know. They're preparing something." "I know." She paused. "Are you still going to the all-hands on Friday?" Ezra's voice was steady. "Yes." And so are they. When Friday came, the auditorium filled with employees who had spent years learning how to survive with their heads down. Ezra walked in alone, but not uncertain. He was dressed plainly. No show. No performance. When Meredith Vale stepped on stage, the room tensed. This wasn't her usual script. She didn't come to deliver numbers. She came to deliver reckoning. She announced 3 things. An internal culture audit had been completed. A review of leadership behavior was underway. And a new executive oversight lead would be introduced immediately. She turned toward the side door. Ezra stepped forward. The silence was sharp. Some clapped, a few stood. Others looked at their shoes, their watches, their guilt. But Vickers didn't clap. He stood at the back, arms crossed, jaw tight. Ezra took the podium. "I'm not here to be your symbol," he began. "And I'm not here to punish. I'm here because some of you have learned how to survive in the system without ever questioning who it was built to exclude. He looked across the room, past the eyes that had rolled when he first spoke, past the ones that now feared being named. This company has a future, but only if it starts telling the truth about its past. And the truth is this: every silence you allowed, every voice you ignored, every laugh you gave when you should have stood up, it wasn't just a moment. It was a message. He paused. But here's another one. You can choose to change. Today. Right now. But you'll have to earn that choice. Brick by brick. Word by word. Then he stepped back. Vickers was gone by the time the room stood to applaud. The applause wasn't for victory. It was for permission to finally become honest in a place that had spent too long pretending. By the 5th week, the building no longer pretended not to notice Ezra Cole. He had become, in every corner of Bellwether and Row, the name said just barely under breath, the face passed in hallways with averted eyes and tightened smiles. Not because he was loud, but because he had become the most dangerous thing a black man could be in a white institution. Undeniable. His name was on memos now. His recommendations were forwarded, not erased. He was CC'd on decisions that once bypassed him entirely. But it was not respect that had changed. It was visibility, and with it, fear. Because when power has been accustomed to moving unchallenged, even quiet accountability feels like war. Martin Vickers had not been seen in 2 days. Rumors moved faster than fact. Some said he was on sabbatical, others claimed he was reevaluating his fit with evolving leadership. What no one said, but everyone knew, was that his authority had cracked. And when authority fractures, silence is the first to scatter. Ezra moved through the halls that week like a man studying the terrain, not conquering, but measuring. He watched how meetings began without him and shifted tone when he entered. He saw how Emma Caldwell, once hesitant, now spoke with a firmness that didn't require his cosign. He saw junior staff, black, brown, queer, immigrant, begin to sit straighter, speak louder, ask questions without apology. But with each shift came resistance. The anonymous forum posts grew more biting. "We don't need a morality officer," one read. "This is a business, not a history lesson." Another, "Why is our new direction being led by someone who thinks every conversation is about race?" Ezra didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because what they called bringing race into it, he had lived. Then came Wednesday. The quarterly stakeholder review, a 2-hour performance of polished data and padded projections, normally led by legacy executives performing legacy rituals. Ezra had been slotted in to present the company's cultural audit metrics. A soft segment, as someone had joked near the elevator. What they didn't expect was for that soft segment to split the room in two. Ezra didn't raise his voice. He didn't need volume to carry weight. He presented a series of graphs, hiring trends over 5 years. Pay disparities across departments. Exit interviews categorized by race and gender. Complaint rates cross-referenced with promotion outcomes. Each chart had one thing in common, a line drawn across it like a scar. And when he was done, he said only this: "This is not about feelings. This is about systems. And systems do not lie. They simply repeat what they're designed to do." Someone from legal shifted uncomfortably. A senior executive muttered, "Correlation isn't causation." Ezra looked directly at him. "No, sir. But silence is consent. And you've given it freely." The CEO, Meredith Vale, sat in stillness. It was the kind of stillness that comes not from peace but from recognition, the moment one realizes the walls they built for safety were walls of exclusion all along. By Friday, the pushback had arrived with force. Not through confrontation. Through procedure. A quiet reassignment of Ezra's direct report. A delay in resource approvals for the Culture Restructuring Initiative. A closed-door concern meeting called without him, but about him. He heard about it through Jacinda. "They said you're moving too fast. Making people uncomfortable." Ezra smiled. "That's the point." But Jacinda didn't smile back. "They're trying to box you in, Ezra." They want to make you the problem so they don't have to admit there is one. Ezra closed his eyes for a moment. Let them build their box. I'm not here to fit inside it. I'm here to burn it. That night, Ezra drafted a memorandum. He titled it simply, "The Reckoning is Not Optional." He outlined specific measures, anonymous reporting protections, third-party HR oversight, quarterly transparency forums. He cited names, incidents, and timelines. He signed it, not with flourish, but with clarity. And then he sent it to every department head, the CEO, and legal. No preface. No apology. Because at some point, a man must stop asking for understanding and start demanding truth. In the days that followed, the building breathed differently. Meetings ran tighter. Senior leaders lowered their voices when passing him. And one afternoon, a janitor, an older black man with gray at his temples and grief in his walk, stopped Ezra in the corridor and said, "They used to look through me like I was furniture. Now they say hello. I think that might be what you're doing." Ezra put a hand on the man's shoulder. "No, sir," he said. "That's Justice's doing. I'm just holding the door open for her." And he kept walking alone, upright, undeterred. Because dignity isn't about being welcome. It's about refusing to leave when you know you belong. In America, the architecture of power has always been careful. It is built not with bricks, but with suggestion. Not with chains, but with meetings. And the rooms where decisions are made, those polished, glass-paneled rooms, still echo with a truth too many are paid to ignore, that inclusion is often performance, while exclusion is always policy. Ezra Cole had, by now, become more than a presence. He had become a mirror. And mirrors, when held up in spaces that thrive on illusion, become dangerous. The sixth week began with another closed-door meeting. No calendar invite. No summary afterward. Just whispers. He found out through Emma Caldwell, who called him late that night. "They're discussing restructuring your role," she said carefully. Ezra didn't ask who they were. In these buildings, they always had many faces and one intention. "Under what grounds?" he asked. Emma hesitated. "Officially? They say your initiatives are diverting attention from operational priorities. And unofficially? They're scared. Of you. Of what you've made visible." Ezra exhaled, not out of surprise, but fatigue. "That's the thing about light," he said softly. "It doesn't ask permission. It just reveals." The next morning, the weekly performance review was held. Ezra entered the room where he had once been mistaken for staff. This time, he took the head seat, deliberate, quiet, unbothered. He didn't wait for the invitation. He brought authority with him. Midway through the meeting, as quarterly projections were being discussed, Vickers returned. He entered with a swagger too stiff to be sincere and a smile too bright to trust. There had been no formal announcement of his leave, and now there was no explanation for his reappearance. "Martin," Emma said, clearly blindsided. "I wasn't aware you'd rejoined the ops review." Vickers waved his hand. "Just observing. Wanted to see how the new ideas are shaping up." Ezra looked at him, then back to his data. The tension in the room was quiet, but heavy. Like a rope being pulled slowly, waiting for a break. When the Wilcox report came up, an internal culture index Ezra had authored, Vickers leaned forward. "I read this over the weekend," he said casually. "It's ambitious. But I worry it's a little too much too fast. We're a company, not a social experiment." There it was. That familiar deflection. The language of erasure, clothed in professionalism. Ezra didn't flinch. "What you call an experiment," he said slowly, "others call survival. You've had 30 years to get it wrong. And now you're asking for more time to stay comfortable while others pay for that comfort in silence." The room went still. No one spoke. No one moved. Because they all knew the rules had changed. After the meeting, Vickers approached Ezra privately. "You're making a lot of enemies." Ezra met his gaze. "No. I'm making them visible. There's a difference." Vickers smirked, but his eyes betrayed something he had never allowed to show before: uncertainty. That Friday, Meredith Vale requested a meeting. This time, in person. No assistant. No pretense. She sat across from Ezra in her executive suite, hands folded, eyes tired. "I've received pushback," she admitted. "Your presence is disrupting the rhythm." Ezra nodded. That rhythm was a lullaby. It kept too many people asleep. She didn't argue. Instead, she looked away, toward the skyline. "You force this company to confront its reflection." Ezra leaned in. "And what does it see?" She didn't answer. Because in truth, it saw exactly what it had always been: a fortress built on curated diversity and protected exclusion. Ezra hadn't broken it. He had simply stopped pretending not to notice the cracks. That night, Ezra walked to the office alone. The building, emptied of its employees, felt like a museum of polite deceit. Awards lined the hallways. Diversity statements framed in chrome. Smiling stock photos of teams that had never existed. And beneath it all, the lie that progress had already happened. He stood in front of a glass wall overlooking the city and whispered, not to the room, but to the generations who had carried this fight before him. "You told me this world wasn't built for me. And you were right. But I stayed, not to be welcomed, but to remember who built it." He left that night without turning the lights off. Because change does not tiptoe. It arrives like thunder in a quiet church. By the 7th week, Ezra Cole had become the storm they pretended not to feel. They still smiled in elevators, still shook his hand in conference rooms, but the grip was colder now, and the eyes searched for him like he was carrying something they couldn't name, and feared might be contagious. The walls of Bellwether and Row hadn't cracked, they had started to echo. Words spoken behind closed doors now had a way of returning through unexpected mouths. And Ezra? He had become the man through whom silence learned to confess. On Monday morning, a memo appeared, and signed, anonymous, posted quietly to the internal feed. It read, "He's making people nervous. People are walking on eggshells. This isn't the culture we built." And in that one sentence, the house revealed its foundation. Because the culture they spoke of wasn't built on collaboration, it was built on comfort. Ezra read it, then reread it, then closed his laptop without comment. That afternoon, during a quarterly planning session, he was asked, pointedly, by an executive from finance if all this energy around diversity wasn't distracting us from hitting our real numbers. He looked at her and said calmly, "What's the cost of pretending everyone's already included?" She didn't answer. Because no one calculates the price of exclusion when they're the ones collecting interest on it. Later that week, a group of longtime employees, quiet allies until now, approached Ezra in the break room. They spoke in low tones, glanced over their shoulders. "Look," one began, "we're with you. But the way you're pushing things, it's making the leadership nervous." Ezra smiled. Not because he was amused, but because he recognized the moment for what it was, the soft betrayal that always follows hard truths. He leaned forward. "You don't make change by keeping powerful people comfortable. You make it by making truth louder than fear." They nodded, but they didn't speak again. The building's resistance became more creative. An IT oversight temporarily locked Ezra out of shared strategy folders. A meeting he was scheduled to lead was reassigned for bandwidth balance. A junior associate was overheard saying, "They're trying to stall him out. Starve the air until he leaves or breaks." Ezra didn't leave. He didn't break. He started documenting. Not just emails. Not just slights. Patterns. He mapped whose ideas were approved and whose were reevaluated. He noted how many times a Black employee was interrupted before finishing a sentence. He tracked how often the word tone was used to dismiss urgency. It wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping. Because one day, someone would ask for proof. And Ezra knew that in America, a Black man doesn't get justice unless he can file it in triplicate. Then came Friday. An emergency board meeting. No notice. No pre-read. No context. Just a subject line. Internal strategic direction, closed session. Ezra walked in, sharp-suited, calm as always. At the head of the table sat Meredith Vale. To her left, a regional director from Titan Equity. To her right, Emma Caldwell, her face unreadable, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Meredith began. We've received reports that your recent initiatives are producing disruption. Ezra did not blink. You mean the truth is interfering with the lie? Meredith's eyes narrowed. No. I mean the culture is destabilizing. Ezra leaned forward. Then maybe it was never stable. Maybe it was just quiet. And quiet doesn't mean healthy. It means no one felt safe enough to speak. A silence fell. Heavy. Politics. The Titan rep cleared his throat. Ezra, we value your insight. But you must understand, these things take time. Ezra's voice was steady, sharp. No. What takes time is pretending you didn't already know. What I've done is make you look at what's been living in plain sight. The room shifted. The weight of that sentence hung like smoke. Emma finally spoke. If we slow down now, she said quietly, we're complicit. That broke something open. Because truth, once said aloud by more than one voice, becomes unignorable. Ezra stood. This isn't about me, he said. It never was. It's about whether you want a company that survives the news cycle or one that survives history. And he left the room. No slammed doors. No raised voice. Just footsteps that didn't falter. That evening, Meredith Vale sent a single-line email to the executive team. Let's proceed. Ezra's direction stands. No applause followed. But the silence afterward didn't feel like resistance. It felt like a reluctant surrender. And sometimes, that's the only beginning you get. By the 8th week, Ezra Cole no longer had to speak for the room to feel his presence. He had become the litmus, the fault line, the clock ticking louder with every delay. Those who had once dismissed him now measured their words. Those who had stayed quiet began to test their voices again, uncertain at first, but growing steadier, like people learning to breathe in a space they were never meant to fill. The company still looked the same. Same white walls. Same polished floors. But the air had shifted. And the people in charge? They had started checking over their shoulders, not for a threat, but for accountability. Change, you see, doesn't always arrive with banners and speeches. Sometimes it comes as a man who refuses to shrink, no matter how many times the room tries to resize him. On Monday morning, Ezra stood in front of the full staff in the main auditorium, 200 employees, a mix of cautious optimism and tight-lipped resistance. A new initiative was being launched, the Equity Compass, a living roadmap for internal justice, cultural audits, mentorship pipelines, and disciplinary reform. But Ezra didn't begin with metrics. He began with a story. When I was 11, he said, I asked my grandfather why he never raised his voice when people disrespected him. He told me, because I needed them to hear the words more than the anger. I knew if I shouted, they'd only remember the echo. He paused. This company has been echoing for years. But today, we started listening. Behind him on the screen were not statistics, but faces. Former employees who had left without justice. Anonymous quotes from complaint files once buried. Redacted names of grievances that went unanswered. The real legacy behind the brand. There was no applause. Not yet. Because the truth doesn't ask for cheers. It demands reckoning. By Wednesday, the resistance sharpened. Vickers, though stripped of title, had begun quietly organizing through back channels, urging senior staff to consider alternative leadership strategies. A memo circulated behind Ezra's back, claiming the culture was losing cohesion under his emotional leadership. But what they didn't realize was that emotion wasn't the threat, exposure was. Jacinda from HR forwarded the memo to Ezra. He read it once, then closed the file. That night, he didn't respond with a counterattack. He hosted a listening forum, open only to staff below management level. Over 80 people came. They didn't speak of Ezra. They spoke of themselves, of microaggressions, promotions lost, lunches skipped to avoid uncomfortable meetings, the exhaustion of smiling past condescension. For the first time, the company became a mirror, and the reflection stared back without flinching. By Friday, the board met privately. The tension could be cut with a paperclip. Meredith Vale sat at the head, silent for most of the meeting. When someone suggested scaling back Ezra's role to reduce disruption, she looked up. "If this feels like disruption," she said slowly, "then what we had before was denial." No one challenged her. She leaned forward. "Ezra is not the problem. He's the measurement of it." And then came the final test. A national journalist had caught wind of the shift inside Bellwether and Rowe. They wanted an exclusive. They asked to speak to Ezra directly. He declined. He issued a public statement instead, brief, unsentimental. "I came not to fix a company. I came to end the practice of being thanked for enduring what should never have been normalized. I don't need the spotlight. I needed the floor. And I have it now, not for myself, but for those who will never have the title to demand one." The article ran. It went viral. Commentators praised his restraint. Others condemned his methods. Ezra said nothing. Because he understood what too few did, the real work doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in the silence after, when the world asks, "What now?" Weeks passed. Bradley Vickers resigned. Quietly. Jacinda was promoted to lead the new Ethical Practices Unit. Emma Caldwell became the first woman of color named Chief Culture Officer. And Ezra? He stayed. Not because he needed to, but because the work wasn't done. On the one-year anniversary of the first time he walked into that boardroom, he stood again, not at the front, but in the back, watching a young black intern present her first strategic pitch. Her voice trembled. Just slightly. But she stood tall. When she finished, the room clapped, genuinely. Ezra smiled. He didn't correct her. Didn't step in. He simply watched. Because now, the room could hold more than just tolerance. It had begun to hold true. And for the first time, it did not break under the weight. End.